Thank you, guys. My name's Clare Callison, and first I want to just thank everyone. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully. Microphone challenge. Thanks for coming to this conference. It's such an amazing experience, and it's great meeting all of you. I'm really excited for this weekend and networking with everybody. I know that our life doesn't stop at home in your shelters, so I really appreciate you guys taking time and, of course, coming to this presentation. So I love talking about transport, so I'm really excited about this. All right, so we can see okay. So a little bit just about me. I started in, sorry, hopefully we can hear. Okay, I started in San Antonio at the City of San Antonio Animal Care Services, so big municipal shelter, the biggest shelter in Bexar County. They still have, when I started, it's the same intake as today, about 31,000 pets, so that's dogs and cats. When I started as a foster first, and then a volunteer, and then I became a staff member in 2010. Like many of you, we've all kind of had the similar experience, but the save rate was only about 28%. Really, really awful. So with a 31,000 intake, that's about 22,000 dogs and cats being killed each year. I didn't know that a lot like everybody else, just volunteering and fostering, just wanted to make a difference, but I didn't understand the magnitude of that problem. So I got a job as the foster coordinator, thinking I would come into this kind of like develop program. I was super naive, you guys. I think we've all been there. I was like, oh, I'm a foster coordinator, great, train me. And my first day, the supervisor, she gave me a flip phone, and it literally had like 8 contacts, and she's like, here it is. I'm like, what is this? And she said, this is your foster program. I'm like, oh my goodness, what? So no real training in this. And so it was really just growing it from the ground up. So hopefully I can help you guys with some of the challenges that I've faced so you don't have to relive them. So that was really great. In the job, I found myself kind of just redoing the job. The job description was really sitting behind a computer, answering emails, and instead I found myself every day, as painful as it was, in the euthanasia building, taking pictures, marketing, trying to get rescues to help, trying to get more adoptions and just exposure, because I saw that the biggest problem we had is just this volume of predominantly dogs going back there, getting killed, and nobody even knew that they existed or even that the problem was out there. So that was a big part of my job, even though I was the foster coordinator. That's really what the job turned into. And then Austin Pets Alive was approached by San Antonio in a pretty desperate situation, needing help. They were looking for a national model to help the situation in San Antonio. So Dr. Ellen Jefferson stepped up, and San Antonio is really the biggest model being able to be duplicated, the Austin model being duplicated in another major city. So there was a lot of naysayers at first, thinking Austin's different, you have more volunteers, you have more fosters. San Antonio is now at a 90% save rate, so it can be done in a huge, a different community, and San Antonio is a great example of that. So I quickly jumped over to San Antonio Pets Alive when that was founded in 2012, and now it is the largest city or rescue partner for the city. So saving about 5,000 to 6,000 dogs and cats a year directly saving, and then marketing an additional 7,800 or so just on the euthanasia list. That number of trying to equate how many that marketing saves is a little bit difficult because we don't always get reports of, hey, I saw this dog or cat through your marketing efforts, but we do estimate it's about an additional 2,500 lives are saved through the marketing efforts. Space has always been a huge issue for SAPA, San Antonio Pets Alive, just because we just didn't have enough kennels. We were always constantly growing our foster program. So I helped build and create a transport program back in about 3 years ago now, and now it saves anywhere from about 1,200 to 1,400 dogs a year. So we have a few cats in there, but mostly dogs. I had a few questions before the session asking about cat transports. I'm happy to talk to you guys about that or pass you on to some of my awesome coworker gurus in the cat world. But to answer your question, we mostly fly cats, and I can talk a little bit about that today. So now I'm the instructor at Maddie's Life Saving Academy here in Austin through American Pets Alive. I teach the systematic canine life-saving course, so that's going through life-saving programs, everything from intake to foster to medical to behavior all the way to adoption and reducing length of stay. So if you guys are interested, I always love having new students come talk to me afterwards, and I'll make sure you guys get my contact information and how to apply for that. And my lovely dog, Nakona. She's such a goofball. She was adopted, and I didn't realize she's deaf, so she knows some sign language. She's pretty great. All right, so Awesome Pets Alive has some really amazing core values that all new volunteers, all new staff, everybody that's interacting and a part of Awesome Pets Alive really embodies. It's part of the culture of the organization. One of these core values is, and you might hear this a lot this weekend, is perfection is the enemy of life-saving. And really that is, it costs, I think, like $2 to $4, something in there, to euthanize or kill a healthy animal in a shelter. So it's such a cheap amount. So we're really up against a crazy competition, right? I mean, it's cheaper to be killing them than saving them. So we can't wait till all the money's there, till these programs are perfect. It's a race against the clock, so you have to start somewhere. And you can't wait till things are perfect. I mean, we all know it's never going to be perfect, but you just have to start somewhere. And the transport program that I was a part of and that I'm going to go over with you guys today and try to help you in your own communities develop one, it's a perfect example of perfection is the enemy of life-saving. Definitely wasn't a perfect program. It grew organically. We didn't have a roadmap. We didn't have a well-thought-out plan, a 5-year plan, or even a 6-month plan. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were just doing it out of absolute necessity and like a little bit of panic, honestly, to try to figure out another option to save these amazing dogs that were dying every day. So my goal for you today is to just really build a foundation for your own transport programs if you don't have one already, or even if you have one already, maybe growing that. And also, I feel like I've been through every weird roadblock or strange challenge, and things have seemed impossible. So hopefully I can help you through so you don't have to painfully relive that. And real quick, before I kind of get into it, how many of you guys are currently transporting right now in your organizations? That's awesome. And then how many are looking to just start and do something? Okay, great. Awesome. So we'll be able to hopefully help you grow it and then help you start one as well. So, and definitely talk to me after, because I know this is a ton of information. All right, so many benefits of transport. Number one, of course, is going to be increasing that kennel capacity, right? We never feel like we have enough kennels. We never have enough fosters, never enough adopters. Many of us live in the South or in really urban areas where our intake is tremendous. So trying to figure out how can we increase our kennel capacity. For those of us in the South that are battling intake problems like an overpopulation year-round, there's no break, it feels like. There used to be a slow season, not anymore really. It is hard to believe that up north there are places that have open kennels. I remember talking to one partner in, I believe it was Spokane, Washington, and she was looking, we were on a conference call, and I've got dogs barking, and I'm trying to figure out like 20 new dogs coming in and like -1 kennels. What am I gonna do? She was like, I like to picture she was like lounging in her office, and she's like, Claire, right now I'm looking down a row of empty kennels. I'm like, God, it must be nice. So these are the partners that you want to work with, and it does exist. I mean, they are having a different challenge, like keeping up with the adoption pressures that they have and keeping their kennels full. So it also is not just about, I'm going to really focus on not just about your small fluffy dogs. I know that we'll get into that in a little bit. I know that is hard to feel like there's only partners that they don't want pit bulls, they don't want big dogs, they just want your poodles, and we all know that poodles are usually easier to get adopted. But it's really tailoring a program, a transport program that's targeting your population that is most at risk and it's the most challenging, which for most of us here is probably like our medium and our larger dogs. And then for, the lady I was talking about in Spokane, fulfilling the demand in her community. If her kennels are empty and she's got people coming to adopt, there is a real risk of, these adopters possibly going to a backyard breeder or going to, Craigslist or whatever and choosing to shop and not adopt. So for a lot of communities, it's fulfilling this adoption demand for puppies or large dogs, whatever it is, hiking buddies. And then this picture here, it's kind of rare for some of us to see this, sorry. So an open kennel, I mean, for a lot of us, this should be like a symbol of relief, right? We see this and it's like, oh, thank God it's open, even though it's just getting clean. You know, maybe that dog got adopted. And I can totally sympathize with your feelings of that relief that happens. But it also should give us a sense of urgency. Even though you might be in communities with a 98% rate and everything's going great, you always have enough open kennels. And there are organizations that are like that, and they have like 10 open kennels that are ready for returns that happen. But just down the street, dogs are dying because of lack of space. So I want you kind of to rethink an open kennel. It should be an opportunity to save a life. You know, so if you are fortunate enough to have a few open kennels, I know not many of us are, but there are communities out there. I guarantee you network here today and find a partner that you can work with and fill those empty kennels. So really increasing that capacity is the key. Also partnerships. This was kind of something this isn't the reason why we started a transport program, but it was a really nice sort of surprise benefit. When two organizations are working together, you are going to be seen in a much brighter light with the media. It's easier to get on the news and get radio stories, get that attention because it's a collaboration. Doesn't happen a lot in our world, but that rescue partnership attracts a lot of great attention. And then you're going to increase your support, not only for individual donors, it's going to catch their eye, get you some funding, but also big foundations getting those grants. They love to see those partnerships and that collaboration. So pushing that. Also, when you actually launch a program, it's really enticing for fosters, volunteers. So these were all things. This isn't the reason why we started transport. It really was to just save lives and get dogs out and open up our kennels, but a great benefit came with it. So I have to add that in there. So our thought process really is probably going to be similar to why you all have your own transport programs in whatever state you're in or you're thinking of growing it. So our process was exactly the same, and it's really simple. Dogs were dying. That was it. We had to find a solution. I think at the time we maybe had 50 kennels, which seems like a lot, but when you're taking in 6,000 to 7,000 animals, it's not very much. And our foster program was great, but was still growing and still developing. So our biggest challenge is just that bottleneck, lack of space. Every day we just felt beat down. We kept getting great adoptions, but it was never enough. We would maybe average 6 to 10 adoptions a day. We were celebrating those, and then 20 more dogs on the euthanasia list would come at us that needed our help, and great, and puppies and small dogs and medium. I mean, there was no difference there. So it was tough. It was just never ending, just relentless. So that's really what pushed us to try to figure out an option. We also had great partners in Texas. We're so grateful for them, but they're overloaded too. Austin, Williamson County, everybody's really swamped. Maybe they could take 1 or 3 dogs at a time. Thank you. That's amazing. You're saving those lives. But we needed 20, we needed 30. So that was the difference. And so Texas was overloaded and it felt saturated. So we had to figure out a way to expand out of Texas. And then, of course, reducing our length of stay. And unfortunately, we weren't really looking at behavior quite yet. So behavior or medical challenges, although we got there. But really our problem, which is like what a lot of people struggle with, is just an overload of really awesome social, dog-friendly, cat-friendly, housebroken dogs, great with people. Why are they sitting for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? And it's really because there was just so many of them. We were doing adoption specials, we had fosters, but we still had a pretty high length of stay. And we know that getting those dogs out, we would be able to give more time to the medical challenges, the behavior cases, and just dogs that maybe weren't the most attractive looking, even though those are my favorite. Give them more time. They deserve it too. So everybody needs a chance, and this is our way of doing it. And every picture I have on here is one of the dogs we've transported, by the way. So I love being able to show them off. Okay, so in December 2016, this is really when transport started. I got a massive to-do list item. I was working in San Antonio at the time at Pets Alive, and Dr. Jefferson called me and was like, hey, hi, I have a partner. This lady I know, she didn't have a plan. She said she's in Portland, Oregon with Pixie Project, and she can take 10 dogs. I said, okay, great, that's awesome. So I hung up the phone. I remember this like so well, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what I'm doing. We don't have any money. We don't have a vehicle. I don't even know who this person is in Portland. Her name is Amy, I guess. And there's no plan, and I don't have any time to coordinate this. Great. So that was a little bit overwhelming, but honestly, that's just how this program started. I got a lead and just ran with it. So 10 dogs to Portland, Oregon. So the process of trying to figure out how the heck are we going to get 10 dogs over 2,000 miles up to Portland, knowing that this is a huge number for us. This was really going to make a difference. We had to go through a few different thought process and try to figure out the procedure. So hopefully I can spell them out here. And as we grew the program, and we were looking to like branch out new partners and things, we had to go through this process every single time. So it's not something that you do just once. You gotta have to establish these checkpoints as you go. So of course the costs, like how much is this gonna cost? What is our budget? Do we even have a budget? Like for most people, you don't really have money set aside for transport. You're lucky if you do, but for a lot of us, we don't. So we've gotta raise the money and build a goal. So you had to figure out how much it's gonna cost you, and then how much am I gonna ask for donations for? I didn't know the partner, I just had a lead, an email address. So reaching out to her, starting a conference call, asking like, what is your rescue like? What are you looking for in dogs? I'm sure we've got it. She knew her strengths in Portland and being in an urban city. She knew, what her adopters kind of wanted and what was high demand. And so we were able to work that out from there. And then the biggest one is like, how are we going to get them there? That was really tough. There's no guide at the time. I couldn't really talk to anybody about transport partners. No one was really doing it that I knew of, at least in San Antonio. Or they already were doing it and they had their own plan. So trying to find a transporter, because we didn't have a vehicle ourselves, so we had to be able to like find somebody that could transport them for us. Vetting the dogs, making sure that we were fulfilling all the requirements, that all the dogs were healthy. If the rescue on the other end had a different vaccine requirement or something, that we were meeting those. And then health certificates. Also, what is a health certificate? So having to like figure out that whole rigmarole, and we'll give you some websites to try to help you, but I still think it's an area when it comes to transport to really try to improve this. There's not a great guide for how to do health certs and what are the rules, so hopefully they improve that. And then, of course, just organizing the prep and the day of logistics and drop off. Like, are they going to go to foster? What time is the transport leaving? All of that good stuff. How are we staying organized? Even though it was 10 dogs and we ramped it up to really, like at some points, doing 80 to 90 dogs at a time, the process when it was for the 10 dogs was really, really difficult. I was covered in sweat, so stressful. You felt like you were, like trying to orchestrate this huge event, and you were. So even though, start small, that's my biggest advice to you, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3 dogs at a time, just start small, but start somewhere. It's gonna make a difference. Because you have to think about every dog that you're able to move out, or cat, that's 1 empty kennel that you can take in another, so double the lives saved. So this, for us, was 20 lives that we were saving. And then the final question, of course, is who's coordinating all this? I spent a lot of my time doing that, but I really couldn't do it full time with my other duties that I was doing. So trying to figure out who was going to coordinate this. And we don't have a budget. We didn't have money to pay somebody. So we had to figure that out too. And then this is Dudley. He was one of the first 10 dogs that went. He's just loving life on a beach in Portland, and it's so crazy to see these rags and riches story. I want to go on the flight myself, or the transport myself. Take me to Portland. All right, so we did decide, so because like I mentioned, we didn't have money for a transport coordinator, what we did is we realized how important this program was, and so it really was just a reallocation of job duties. So we were pouring a lot of resources and doing a lot of effort, and we still do, marketing the euthanasia list. So there was one coordinator, we had 2 coordinators. We just took one of the coordinators and said, okay, for 20 hours a day, instead of focusing on the euthanasia list and marketing, what we want you to do is focus on growing a transport program. So for half of her time, she was focused on transport. And this is really oversimplified, but probably very similar to the process that you all have. So the dog starts, at the shelter. You figure out what the criteria is that the rescue's looking for, and then you identify them as a candidate, and then you pitch them to the partner. That's what we call it. So sending either a photo or a video, whatever you guys agree on, and then as well as notes and everything that goes with it. And then from there, ideally, the partner's going to say, yes, bring on Dudley to Oregon. We'll take him in. And then we're going to do all the appropriate vetting, making sure, heartworm tests, everything's up to date, flea and heartworm prevention, all the vaccines, all that good stuff, spay, neuter. And then from there, hopefully they go to a foster home, get them out of the shelter so you can start using that kennel again for faster turnover. And then they always need a health certificate of traveling out of state. So the dog gets a health certificate and then goes and leaves on transport. So this is a lot of work. Again, oversimplified. We know that there's a lot of weird things that can happen through this nice, clear-cut step process. But it's really going to be the transporter's job to be handling all the logistics. So they really are an important part of this. Many rescues, as you guys know, if you're working with another organization, it's really difficult to work with 5 different people from that organization. You like to have your one point person contact. So for the transport coordinator, they are going to be your middleman or your liaison between the source shelter and the receiving shelter. So they're handling all those details and logistics. Transport involves everybody, right, in your organization, from fosters to volunteers, your medical teams, got to get the vetting and the health certificates done. So the transport coordinators also handle working with all of your staff or all of your volunteers in all the different departments. So they've got to be really resourceful and just moving around and connecting with everybody. So choosing your transport coordinator, my little MacGyver reference, I love duct tape. I didn't realize, but I have duct tape in all my presentations. So duct tape, yeah, it comes in handy. So including in transport, which I'll go over. So I can't stress this enough. Transport is a beast, right? We all know this. Your transport coordinator has got to be resourceful. Transport can be very expensive. There's never enough money to probably send all the dogs that you want to send. And that is a really tough problem. So you can't have somebody that is just going to sit and not try to figure out solutions and ways to do things cheaper, more efficiently, how to utilize volunteers. You really need to be super resourceful as a transport coordinator. There's so many roadblocks and challenges that happen, from broken down vehicles to flights getting canceled to fosters not showing up. I mean, I could go on and on of things that happen, or partners backing out at the last minute, nightmare situations. It's not common, but it does happen. And you can't have somebody that's just going to throw their hands up and say, you know what, it's not worth it. They've got to be relentless. They have to see a challenge and then always find a solution. It might not be perfect, but they've got to figure out a solution. They can't just be negative Nancy's all the time. Proactive, this is probably, I should have put this on the top of the list, probably number 1. I know it's so tempting to just say, tell me all your rescue contacts and I'm going to use them too. But really, rescues, I mean, yes, that's very helpful. But being proactive and finding that one-on-one or that individual connection is just so invaluable, and that's how it all happens. So you can't wait, like Dr. Jefferson was saying earlier, you can't wait for the rescues to come to you. You have to be proactive about it, and you need a transport coordinator that's going to be comfortable getting on the phone, talking to people, emailing people they don't know, and putting themselves out there. You're not a burden. Don't feel bad. You're advocating for the dogs in your care that need you the most. They've got to be professional. They're representing your organization to the rest of the country. So we all know the rescue community. We are a lot to handle sometimes, I know. There's going to be some tough personalities. A lot of us have some challenges with that. You just always have to remain professional, and they've got to be able to have that connection with another group. We all have our challenges. It's hard in Texas to talk to somebody maybe in Maine or Vermont. Sometimes our challenges are going to be different, and it's hard to always, relate to those things. So just being professional on that. And then, of course, just dedicated to life-saving. That goes with all the challenges that they're going through. They have got to have a good head on their shoulders, know why they're there, because it can be grueling and long hours. So they've got to be dedicated to the mission. Sorry. There we go. So different modes of transportation and something that is going to be unique to your community. So it's either within your state or out of your state. In Texas, there's very few places, and we're working on that. That's what this conference is all about. But there are a few places that are like, we've got open kennels and everything's wonderful. It seems like all of us are kind of in the same boat in a space crisis. So for us, out of state seemed to be the most natural fit. In other communities, maybe in the Midwest, it might be a little bit different. Of course, there's ground transport. I've seen all different types. I'm sure you guys have too. People have gotten really creative. Trailers, converted horse trailers, buses, school buses that are gutted and converted with kennels, different vans that are outfitted and retrofitted to be able to transport dogs. Just really, I'm in RVs. I'm just really impressed with all the creative modes that people have come up with to be able to save dogs. So I think it's great, and cats. Also, if you guys aren't part of this website, or network, I would definitely join it. It's called Doobert, Doobert. So you do have to go through a application process to be not only a source partner, but also the rescue partner, and also the volunteers involved in this network are also vetted, references checked, and everything. It's not super rigorous, but it's a good process to go through. And I've heard that this website is kind of considered to be Uber for rescue dogs and cats. So basically, volunteer will sign up, and if a rescue transport is going through their area, they get an alert, and then your transport coordinator is going to be organizing with these different transport volunteers. So it's like a relay of volunteers, this Doobert app and website gives you the ability to build an itinerary and basically, a transport plan. So it's really, really great. And you can find good partners through that. So I would definitely recommend getting part of that. It's good for smaller scale transports. And then, of course, flight transports. There's nonprofit companies. You guys might have been hearing about them or already working with them. Wings of Rescue, Dog is My Co-Pilot, Pilot and Pause. There's probably a few others that I don't know about, but those flight transports are great. They're wonderful because they pride themselves on, they're a nonprofit themselves, so they're not charging the source or the receiving shelter, because we all know that the cost can be pretty high. Then there's commercial air flights. People use Southwest. I've heard Alaskan Air has a rescue discount, and so looking into commercial flights is also an option too for maybe smaller scale transports. So when you come to, in San Antonio, we did both ground and air, and I'll kind of go over that. But for ground transport, you have really two options that I know about. And so it's either you've got to figure out, are you going to do it, your organization, are you doing it yourself? Or are you going to pay another company to do it? Or are you going to use a relay of volunteers like what Doobert does? So for your organization, if you're planning on doing it yourself, you have a few considerations, right? You have to have a vehicle, figure out what an actual vehicle that you're going to use. You've got to be able to have credible, safe drivers that you can rely on. There's insurance considerations, licensing, which I'll go over in a little bit, and then, of course, maintenance. So if you're doing it yourself, you're on the hook for those maintenance things, and then emergency plan. So if the vehicle breaks down, or if you need, of course, you're going to need oil changes and tire changes and all that good stuff. So that's going to be a cost that your organization takes on. This is something that I know San Antonio's looking into, kind of moving away from the third-party transport company model and doing it themselves. I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to do it. It's just what fits for your organization. These are just some considerations to keep in mind. The third-party transport company, most of the time they're a for-profit company. So there's things to consider there, a cost. I've seen it cost anywhere from $50 to $250. Most typical, the cost per dog I've seen is about $150, is pretty basic. Again, this is a transport going over 2,000 miles, like Texas to the Pacific Northwest or something like that, or New England. And then, of course, coming up with an agreement. Are you going to be the only rescue using this service? Are your dogs sharing a space with other organizations? Is this cost a fixed cost? Is there any negotiation that can happen? Logistics, do they have enough space for the dogs that you need to send? Will they go to the right partners that you want them to send? And then this is the big one, is just vetting the company. Not all transport companies, as we know, are created equal. So making sure that you're doing your research, and we'll go into that in a little bit as well. And then relay way of volunteers works great. This is, of course, going to be free, so you're not going to have to pay anybody, but you've got to consider, volume. So if you need like 30, 40 dogs to move out a month or something, volume might be a little tricky. And then you do still need a transport coordinator to be able to go over the itinerary and go over all the logistics as well. So just a few considerations with ground transport. There's definitely a lot of benefits to ground transport. It can be more flexible time-wise. So unlike a plane taking off, if you're an hour late, 2 hours late, 30 minutes, it's not going to be usually a huge deal breaker. So that you can have some flexibility, because we all know that sometimes it's a really difficult thing to get a bunch of fosters or a bunch of volunteers at the same place at 5 in the morning. So time-wise, it can be a little bit more flexible. Space-wise, it can be a little bit more flexible. A plane usually is just loading the crates in, and you can do a little bit of tweaking and Tetris of, resizing dogs to crates and kind of rearranging the space in a plane, but for the most part, it's going to be a fixed space. Ground transport, you can get pretty creative about it. One transport, I remember we had too many large dogs, which was always the problem, but we took an extra 30 minutes, and the transporter was wonderful, and actually he had the shelves built, wood shelves, to be able to put the kennels in securely, and he was able to move a shelf around or a bar in there to be able to Tetris in a couple more large kennels. So things like that were really appreciated and made a huge difference, so we didn't have to leave anybody behind or delay them to the next one. And then ground transport is year-round, so usually, apart from the polar vortex, which maybe some of you guys have been surviving, usually you can drive in rain and snow. I have had a flight not leave on time because of weather, because they're very dependent on good weather. And sometimes if there's a storm up north, you've got 24, 48 hours until you kind of hit it. So sometimes you can time it just right. So ground transport has some flexibility. And then there just seems to be more options. There's not a lot, there are some flight options, of course, but there seems to be definitely a lot more ground transporters than there are flights. So you've got some flexibility there. And then a responsible transporter. So no matter what your model is, if you're going to do it yourself, or you're going with another company, or you're going with volunteers, it's just so important that you have reliable, safe drivers and transport practices, and you're following the best practices and making sure if you're not doing it yourself that they're doing it. It's always a red flag if you're going a long distance and there's only one transporter. Ideally, we used to have one company that we paid that had 3 drivers, so one person driving, one person co-piloting and kind of navigating, and another conked out in the back to be able to rotate, because you really don't want them, obviously, with 60 dogs in tow to be taking a trip, taking a break at a hotel on the way. The goal is to get the dogs there to the destination as quick as possible, make sure that they're getting walked in their water and it's comfortable for them, but you don't want to be lollygagging and road tripping. So it's nice that they were able to not take a break and just rotate drivers. So also if something happens to one of them, you need that support, and also just the manpower to take care of so many dogs. We know it's a poopy, filthy kennel mess. So somebody that's able to help with that, it's important. Asking for recommendations. If a rescue or a transporter doesn't have great recommendations, or someone has had a really, really bad experience, don't just brush that off. That's pretty legitimate. Transport is a pretty stressful experience, so you want to make sure that your transporter is prepared. It's important for them to be organized, and they're really following the gold standard, because even a holdup of 3, 4, 6 hours can be really stressful on the dogs because somebody didn't label a kennel correctly, or they're not checking microchips. So just making sure that they're being really organized, and then the same that the source shelter is organized as well. So speaking of organization, a few tips that we used, and this again was literally the same thing, and we've tweaked it along the way as we figured out what works and what doesn't work. But this original spreadsheet, Google spreadsheet, is the same as we use for the 10 dogs. We just developed the system, we've tweaked it along the way, but it works really well. After location, on the right-hand side, it goes on a little bit to say, the foster's contact information, the rescue organization, if they have any other notes in there, just cut off here. But the big one is, making sure you've got just a basic animal ID. A lot of times there's duplicative names, which drove us all crazy, but sometimes, the ID is a big help with that. Making sure that, any identifiers, if breed is, some rescues will have a breed restriction or they want to know breed. Even though it wasn't important to us, we would put it down there just in case. Gender, and then spay-neuter status. More identifiers, their color, approximate weight. That's really important too if you're like sizing kennels and trying to figure out who's going to fit. Microchip, that's number one. That's a big help. If all else fails, they have a microchip. And then making sure vaccination dates or heartworm test dates. Most states are not going to be taking heartworm negative dog or heartworm positive dogs, so ensuring that there's a heartworm negative status there. It helps not only the rescue partners to ensure that all the vaccinations and everything's in check, but it helps you stay organized. Like, oops, we forgot to booster this one, or we need to booster this one, or we need an updated heartworm check. They were 6 months at the time, now they're 8 months or something. So figuring that stuff out, if they have any medical considerations. And then as you're sending, we would work with boarding to be able to put temporary dogs that were going on transport to boarding. So we had to, and then we've got fosters, so we had to organize their location of where they're at. So that was important. Then I have a picture of the paper collars that some vet clinics and some doggy daycare places or boarding places use. It's definitely not perfect. They fall off sometimes, but this was really, really helpful for us. So just a name and an animal ID. Every dog got one. I've seen people use actual collars, but this is a pretty good way because you're not usually going to get your collars back. So if you have a limited amount, you can use those as an identifier. This is in addition to a microchip. And then there's a duct tape again. I always have duct tape. We use it for everything. Labeling kennels. So you can use kennel sleeves that looks nicer. For us, they kept getting chewed on transport, and it was a lot of money to keep replacing them, so we would just simply duct tape their kennel. However, we would make sure that the transporter, the actual person doing it, had a binder with each location of where the dogs were going, and then a kennel card for everyone with their microchip and a nice picture, so that they had a backup plan, because if you're just relying on a kennel card and it gets chewed, then it can be chaos. So and this was a work in progress. Every time transport happened, we're like, what can we do better? This was a disaster this time. So this is kind of what we settled on. I don't think it's perfect by any means, and everyone has their own preference, but just some tips if this helps you all. So this seemed to work for us. All right, so fun stuff. So for the transporter, again, there wasn't a lot of rules in like a guidebook for me when we jumped into this, but these are things that, talking to USDA and with the Animal Welfare Act, when you're looking at a transporter, these are things that you absolutely have to look for. If they're doing it for profit, and they're transporting, you really want to see that USDA license. And it's not really too difficult to get a license if they're a reputable transport company. They get 3 tries within 90 days. So if they see one thing that they need to correct or 5 things, they'll get another try. They get 3 tries, within 90 days to correct any of those things. And then if you ever hear like, oh, it's a cost thing, it's too expensive, the average cost of a USDA license for a transporter is only $120 to $230 a year on average. Not really that much money when you're doing such big transports and you're a company. So again, not a good excuse if you're not licensed. Biggest thing from the USDA when they're doing a transport that they're seeing is not proper vet care. So not everybody's vaccinated, or dogs are too young really, to be transported. And then the kennels aren't labeled, which please label the kennels. From being someone that's received a transport as one that is sending out, you guys can all relate how much of a mess it is if kennels aren't labeled and the dogs aren't labeled. This is basic stuff, but it has to be said. Transport can scare people because there are a lot of stories that hit the media of transports gone wrong, and it can be horrific. But don't let that be a reason to stop you guys from doing transport. There's amazing companies out there. If you're doing it yourself, then you've got a good guide of the things that you need to be looking for. So making sure the animal can stand up, turn around, and posture normally in the kennel. It's going to be important. For flights, we usually used a little bit smaller of a kennel so we could fit everybody in, but knowing that the flight was only a couple hours. Yes, they could get up, they could turn around, but we really didn't want them being able to bounce and jump around when they're in a flight. Ground transport, we usually make sure that kennel is a little bit bigger for them because they're in the transport vehicle longer. Bedding material and a solid bottom, so not transporting. I know it seems like common sense, but we have to say it. Having some sort of potty pad or newspaper or some sort of bedding down or a towel or a blanket, and not putting a dog on like a wire bottom. They always have to have that tray if you're using a wire kennel. Food and water containers are available. Transport, can be stressful. Sometimes you don't want to maybe feed them so much that they're going to get nauseous or anything, but making sure that they obviously have food and water available to them. Not overcrowded. I know it's super tempting to try to stuff as many as you can in there. And, for a transport that's going like 1 or 2 hours down the road in a van, totally fine, to put kennels on top and make sure that they're secure. But if you're going, over 2,000 miles across country, it's going to be really important that you're not overcrowded. But then, use your space too. Not to say that empty space is a good thing. And then no paws out of the kennel. So if a dog is too small for a wire kennel and they can get their paw out, that can be dangerous. I always like to think if there was a car accident or a sudden stop, you don't want anything happening that could hurt the animal. So making sure the kennels are properly sized. If you're using wire kennels or any kind of kennel, making sure they're not broken with broken doors or wires hanging out, that could be a safety hazard. And then kennels must be secured. This is a big one. I'm still not great at using the straps and things. That's why I'm not in charge of that, but always making sure that they are strapped down, they're locked in. Again, think if you got in an accident or you had a sudden stop, you don't want, kennels everywhere and dogs to hurt themselves or cats to hurt themselves. And then it has to be properly ventilated. So I believe the USDA doesn't require air conditioning, but I don't know many transporters that can do it without. Really best standard is 60 to 85 degrees in the vehicle at all times. So, and keep in mind too, there's been so many transports where we're in tank tops and we're sweating in Texas, and then when they get there, they're in snow, so you're gonna have a variety of temperatures to contend with. So just keeping that in mind and being prepared for all the extremes, extreme heat and then a blizzard, because that happens all the time. And then the aisleway is as tempting as it is to see that aisleway and you're like, we could put kennels in there. It's important to be able to walk and you can see every single dog in your transport, and they can be easily accessed. So if you go back there and somebody's in distress and you can't get to them or you can't even see them, that could be pretty bad. So just making sure you've got that aisle. Gold standard is stopping every 4 to 6 hours. That doesn't necessarily mean you're walking 60, 80 dogs every 4 to 6 hours. I think that's a lot. But it's putting eyes on everyone, making sure everyone's okay, that they've got a drink of water. And then of course walking, I would say, closer to the 8-hour mark. Or even 10 hours is good for walking. So, and then again, just getting there as quick as you can, but ensuring that they're getting the walks and the food and everything that they need. So a couple things that were really helpful that I didn't even think about until we started this. So if your vehicle, there's some things like buses and RVs where if you've got 2 people, you've got a driver and then somebody that can access the dogs or the cats while you're driving, like an RV or a bus. That's great because then you don't necessarily have to stop for everything. But a really common way of transporting is with a trailer. And so your drivers that are hauling like in the truck or something aren't necessarily going to have eyes on the dogs. So one of the things I'd recommend is getting some sort of camera, like with Wi-Fi access or something, because it's inevitable that dogs get out every transport. So if you've got a dog kind of running in the trailer and you go to open the door, you could have somebody escape. So being able to keep eyes while you're in the truck or while you're outside, you know what's going on in that trailer at all times. And then also if, a kennel falls or something bad happens, but just that it's good for peace of mind. Then also like a dashboard, you can get a temperature gauge to see, making sure that your AC is still functioning, your heat's going good, that the temperature is comfortable for the dog. So these are things that we learned along the way, just really nice things that are out there. You can buy them on Amazon, so really helpful too, just good for peace of mind. And then I won't bore you with this, but this is something I had no idea about until, of course, we're in the middle of it. So with a USDA license, so say you're paying a company to do it for you and you're not transporting, you still, so there's Group A, that say they're the Texas shelter or the Southern shelter, and Group B is maybe up north. If Group B is giving any sort of money or even an in-kind donation, so say they're like, you send us 20 dogs and we'll send you a tray of DHPP or DAPP vaccines back, then Group A would require a transport license. So that's not really known. Again, it's going to be that average cost, I think $230 or $270. So not incredible, but if there's any sort of money transaction, like, hey, we'll give you a donation for these dogs, then a license is required. Even if an organization is doing the transport themselves, but there's no money or in-kind donation being given from Group B to Group A, then you don't need a license. So that seems weird, because you would think if you're a rescue organization doing transport, you need a license. But as long as you're not getting paid directly from that group that you're giving them, you don't need a license. Of course, you can ask for all the donations you want in the world, and you don't have to get a license for that. So donations from the public are fine. Small things like, hey, the blankets that came in the kennels, can Group B have them? Is that okay? That's not a huge monetary value thing. It's more of like the vaccines and things like that are common. So that's when a license would be required. I'll give you guys the website at the end, USDA, which I had to like stumble and try to find myself. Again, there's not great guides out there. But when in doubt, if you guys are ever, wondering, what are the rules or something, a quick call to USDA is helpful. They're actually really, they respond pretty quickly, and you can get a call and just ask all your questions. So it's really helpful to go through some of this stuff. If you're like, I don't even know where to start, I think we're doing the right thing, just get on the phone with them, and they're really helpful. They'll also email back and forth with you too. So here's a big one, right? Finding our rescue partners. So I wish I had a better answer for you with this, in terms of like, this is the golden ticket, this is the silver bullet solution. Really, it just takes a lot of work and a lot of networking. By nature, I'm not super like outgoing and, love to talk to everybody, but you have to kind of force yourself out of that bubble. You've got to be able to talk to strangers and talk to people you don't know, put yourself out there. I also hate like asking for things. I would be an awful development director, but I had no hesitation saying, can you take 20 dogs? Can you take 30 dogs? We will get them to you. Can you do it? So it's asking those questions. I'm happy to help you, and give you talk to you guys about some different contacts that we've used and some leads we have. But honestly, the best way to do it is, I don't know your organizations and what your strengths are and what your needs are, is figuring out, making those connections on your own. And really, it's that one-on-one connection that's going to build a partnership. I know that sounds super cheesy, but it's the truth. A lot of these northern partners have quite a few people cold calling and random emails to them. I would just go ahead and say, hey, can I get somebody on the phone? Or hey, can I talk to your transport coordinator? Shoot an email, because if they're getting all these requests, but they really like you and they like what you're about, they're going to be like, hey, can we start up something? Can we work with you? And it happens all the time. So don't underestimate that. Just a quick conference call does wonders. Also, some of our best partners that we had in San Antonio came from mutual connections. So from a lot of us are connected with Maddie's and PetSmart, charities, Petco Foundation. These are people that are working, and of course American Pets Alive. These are people working all across the country. So they're seeing different needs. They're seeing those kennels or those rescue organizations that have open kennels and that have space and capacity. They have rescue organizations up north that have behavior programs and not a surplus of dogs coming in, medical capacity, pretty large budgets that can handle it. So they're connected, so use your mutual connections. Get on the phone with them or shoot them an email and say, hey, we're looking to start up a transport program, or just send 3 dogs somewhere. Do you have any suggestions? I guarantee you're going to get some sort of help or some sort of lead. It's just what you're doing with that lead. Also, get creative. Shelter Love is here. Wonderful shelter software. They work around the country. If you guys utilize them, again, they're seeing all these different rescue organizations. They've been great about connecting some of us together. Microchip Company, I see Found Animals is here. They're great, again, all over the country. Using Facebook, using Dubert, getting tips from your rescue network. A lot of people are online, and some of the great partnerships I've been able to kind of establish have been through just a random lead on Facebook saying, hey, my friend works in New Hampshire and works with this rescue organization. Here's a name of someone you could contact. But it's about following up with every single lead. I can't stress that enough. No matter how kind of silly it is, no matter how busy you are, that's what's going to grow your program. If you're happy with just maybe transporting 10 dogs a month and you've got your one partner and it's working for you, great. But for some of us, we need more partners. We need more volume. And we need partners to maybe even be able to help pay and contribute to the cost of it too. So getting on the phone, I can't tell you how many times partnerships haven't worked out. I'd say it's like 50-50, but more often than not, they're working out and it's going really well, but it was following up with that lead. Seems simple, but it works. So not just the fluffy small dogs. I know a lot of us have probably been on the phone and the rescue organization says, we only want dogs under 15 pounds and they fit this stereotype in this. And those are great. They're good partners to have. You need them if you need that volume out of your shelter. I get it. But a variety of partners is key. What we found is, there's a difference in communities across the country. So like when we started in Portland, they wanted dogs that would be able to walk. They couldn't have leash reactivity really because they had to be able to walk in busy streets. A lot of the adopters, they were in downtown Portland. A lot of the adopters lived in the city. They wanted to go to pet-friendly patios, but they were able to take kind of senior dogs. They said they had a lot of adopters that wanted older dogs 4 and up. They didn't want our puppies. They didn't want our young, crazy, wild child. So that was a great partner to have, variety of partners. Maybe somebody more in the country has got more of an outdoorsy, population. Say in Wyoming, I'll show you a video in a little bit at the end, partner that their community is huge into outdoors and hiking and skiing. And that was great for us because it was an outlet for these dogs that were just like pent up and had all this energy, can run 5 miles. Turns out a lot of them act like crazy in a kennel, but they're just couch potatoes at home. I know we all have them. But still, it was a great outlet to have. So having a variety of these partners, they all have different strengths, is going to be important for you. And it's okay to say no. When you're first starting, I wouldn't put in a lot of effort in a partner that you feel isn't going to be helpful for you. If they really just want to take your small little fluffy dogs and you really need medium and large size active dogs to get out, just say, you know what, it's not worth it, and that's with every one of your programs. If something isn't resulting in lives saved, it's not worth the effort. So same with transport. If, even though it's great that they'll be able to take some of your dogs, I wouldn't invest that much effort if it's not really going to help you. It has to be mutual. And then you have to be, just strive to be really easy to work with. And organization's key for any rescue here or any shelter that's worked with another rescue organization. You know how much of a headache it is to have somebody that's discombobulated and not organized. You want to make it easy for them to pull dogs from you, or cats. So getting your paperwork in line, being really open with, open with communication, staying organized, sharing those spreadsheets. We use Google spreadsheets so we can share it with the rescue organization so they know exactly who's coming to them, what medical they have, anything going on. So that's huge. Striving to make a personal connection. I've actually been really surprised and amazed by the loyalty that sometimes gets created by a rescue organization saying, no, I want to work with them because I've got this connection and we feel comfortable together. And then getting to know your partners. What are their strengths? What's their capacity? What is their community like? Again, a little bit what we were talking about. Are they in an urban area where most people are living in apartments and that's kind of like Austin, pet-friendly patios and everybody wants to bring their dog places and it's a lot of congestion? Or are they more in the country and they like working dogs and they like to go, hiking and go to the mountains on the weekend or the beaches? It just depends what the community is like. It's amazing how different it is around the country. So a variety is great. Oops. All right, and then I talked about the conference call. I know it seems simple, but I think that's the most efficient way, even though we love email. I love email. Calls give me anxiety, but still, a conference call I think is honestly the fastest way when you're starting. Like say you get that lead, the next step would be, hey, can we get on a phone call and just work out some of these things? Number one, do your missions align? You don't necessarily have to have the same mission. You don't need to necessarily have the same, views on everything or even the same, you might be focused on saving volumes and they might be working on behavior or medical, or they do a 2-week adoption process and you're more communication open adoptions. That doesn't necessarily need to align, but you do need to align on, say a dog we send up to you has some behavior considerations. Are you going to just euthanize them? Making sure that you're not sending your dogs or your cats to a place that isn't truly safe. And so really asking, it is kind of a tough question, but that's a simple question is, what would deem, grounds for you to euthanize a dog or cat that comes into your care? That's a question I always ask a rescue partner before entering into any partnership. We have had partners where they do the stuffed dog test and the hand in the bowl, and if they don't do well on that, this was in the beginning, then they're going to say, hey, we need you to take them back. And it's like, what? We're in Texas. So that, lesson learned. You ask those questions before you send dogs there. Luckily, they went to another partner and they're okay, so everything's good. But that that did happen, and it was super stressful. So, getting that stuff sorted out in before that. Behavior and medical capacity. We didn't have a ton of resources, especially for orthopedic surgeries, and to keep up with some of these medical cases. And there are some partners that have, vets on staff, and their executive director might be a vet, or they're a board member and they like special surgeries, or they have a partnership with a vet school that comes in and does spay-neuter. So figuring out what their strengths are, and if they're willing to take these cases, ask. You're not going to fill a transport of 20 dogs with needing FHOs or something, or cherry eye repair. But if you can get 3 or 4 of them out, great, send them. That's a very valuable partner to have. And then length of stay, their adoption process, just ask that question. And again, it's not like grilling them. It's just more of I want to get to know you. I want to make sure that we're fulfilling what you guys need. And so it's mutually beneficial for both of us. Do they have a long length of stay? That's probably not going to be a partner, A, that's really looking to bring in dogs, but B, that would be a red flag. You don't want to contribute to their challenges and be sending dogs up that might be sitting. But more often than not, a lot of these partners that are looking to transfer in, it's because they have open kennels and they're not able to keep up. They need more dogs to adopt out. So, and then really the goal is solving the empty kennel problem. I would respect, and you hear it a lot. So as much as I say no small fluffy dogs, it's okay, to have a variety of partners, and it's okay to try to get other dogs out. I do respect, and you hear it all the time, like, oh, well, they won't take our bully breeds or pit bull looking dogs, whatever you like to reference them to. And I respect that. I think it's great. I think they should speak up. So if they have a lot of Chihuahuas or a lot of large dogs, but hey, for some reason, cattle dog mixes or really active dogs or your seniors, they go fast up here, respect that and say, okay, great, we will send them, because most often than not, we have an overpopulation problem. That's why we're looking at transport. So if you can get those masses out, you'll have more time to focus on your blocky-headed dogs or your more challenging cases, whatever it may be. So instead of bashing the partner, just respect it and try to see if you have, dogs that will fit what they can take. Sending the roster, I talked to you guys about that a little bit, is just sending that spreadsheet, staying organized. And then after a transport happens, I always like to have sort of like a quick debrief. Get feedback from them. How did the dogs look? Is everything good? Is everyone settling in well? This is really rewarding for the team too, as well as your fosters. They're really invested. If they don't ever hear what happens, when they get there, that sometimes can be deflating. The best way to get them to come back to fosters, if they see a success story, they see one of their dogs, like Rooster here, got adopted. Oh my gosh, look at how happy he is. They're back for another one. It becomes an addiction, and a good addiction. So those ongoing check-ins and getting that feedback after transport. Also, like, whoops, ringworm came up, hearing about that. What can we do better about maybe our health certificate process, or what did we miss? Feedback from transport's really helpful. So just don't forget, it's not just about sending them out, but really checking in with that partner. And then you're really going to be establishing a relationship. So that's helpful. So for dog criteria, it's really going to be up to the individual partners. So the pitching process, I've seen everything from just, hey, give me a photo and a little bio, or just send me photos, or just send me bios. I don't really care, like a quick description, all the way to more intensive, like 5 different videos of like kennel approaches and all of these things. So I've seen everything in between. It just depends what the partner wants. But through it all, you just want to be transparent and just not hide things, because you don't want a dog to get up there and you're like hiding, like, oh, he's really dog reactive, or he's been kind of naughty to his dog friends here, and then you're not disclosing that and they're having some challenges. I mean, it's just good practice to just be transparent with that. An ideal situation, we've had maybe a couple partners that they have had such a great relationship with our transport coordinator, and this is like so amazing, that they just let you choose the dogs, and if anybody falls out of that criteria that they would normally not take, they just ask, hey, send me just a quick picture and bio if you have like an orthopedic or something coming up that we're not used to taking. So that's really kind of an ideal case, because you're not doing that labor intensive, like sending all the pictures and bios. But that is hard it takes sometimes like a year or 2 years to get to that trust level, because that's a big responsibility. So don't expect that, but just know that's a really great goal to get to. And then you've got to really re-emphasize, if you're the transport coordinator yourself or you're managing one, that they're balancing. They're not just, it's a really tricky place to be, because not only do they have to balance what this rescue partner is saying, I need this, I want this, I need this, they've got to also see what we need out, what's going to benefit the source shelter. So I just need small dogs all day. Your transport coordinator's got to be that one advocating, okay, I can send you 5 small dogs, but can you take, 5 maybe medium or large dogs? So balancing what is going to work for the partner, but also what's working for you. That helps a lot. This is my foster Nelson who went on transport. He's ridiculous. So this is the $1 million question. Who's paying for this? This is a big one. And honestly, I'll just be completely honest with you guys. I feel that the transport model in this country is really pretty broken. There's so many southern shelters that are trying to get dogs out, that the rescues in the north, a lot of times they just haven't had a budget. I don't think it's a matter of being sneaky or anything, but it's just they don't have a budget to help pay. So you've got these sort of desperate southern shelters doing everything they can to get these dogs out, doing all the legwork. They're not collecting an adoption fee, the north is, and a lot of times doubling or tripling that adoption fee and not giving anything back. So I wish I had a better answer for that. It's something that I'm really promoting and pushing, and I think it's just the right thing to do. If you're taking in a dog and you're getting a fully vetted dog that you can quick turn and adopt out, help that southern partner, help the southern partner with the transport costs, or is there something, you don't have to pay for all of it, but maybe contribute something. But I understand resources are limited and boards and directors aren't used to budgeting to pay the South for transport, but I do think it's something broken that we need to work on. So one way we kind of got around that is, negotiating with some of these partners, like, hey, we will make sure they're spayed and neutered, completely up to date with vetting. Some of the partners wanted like a 4DX test. We'll take the cost of that, but you pay for transport. And so sometimes that helps, offset it a little. In San Antonio, we were paying a third-party company. So we were paying, maybe on average $150 a dog. So it's costly. Some transport would get up to $10,000 for one run. Not very sustainable and really hard for any budget to be able to take that on, even with donations and grants and things. So it's something you've got to really negotiate. I don't know if this is a trend, but I have found that the West, it's a little bit tricky to get. They're not quite caught on to the being able to contribute, but the East, there are quite a few partners that have been helpful with that. So it just sort of depends. So just do what you can to afford, do what you can to save the most lives. So do what you can afford. Don't go beyond your means. I know it's tough, but push yourself with fundraising. Don't be afraid, to apply for different grants that are out there. Utilize your media. I mean, for a lot of communities, transport is novel. This is new. Radio, TV, they're going to pick this up. This is pretty exciting. And then engage your individual donor base and try to get them. Maybe they'll sponsor one dog to go on transport. Or can you sponsor this 5-dog transport for $500 or something, or half that? Whatever they can do will help. But getting a fundraising team, you probably don't have extra money for staff to do this. And a lot of times it's hard when you're working with a fundraising team and they're trying to get, they're trying to bring in money for just general operating costs and you're pushing for a transport program. That's where your volunteers come in. You're going to have some passionate volunteers and say, hey, would you be able to help me, like bring in some funds? And this could be your sole focus, is working on bringing in money for transport. So as I mentioned earlier, we did have a real big push to expand our rescue partners and just grow this program. It was wildly successful. And so because APA here, in Austin is the last resort for animals for Austin Animal Center, they're getting, they're filling in that gap. San Antonio does the same for the city of San Antonio, the municipal shelter. So not only, taking parvo and neonatal kittens in distemper cases, but also just everybody on the euthanasia list, which unfortunately they are still euthanizing for time and space and still have a very rigid 3-day stray hold. So the volume was tremendous on San Antonio Pets Live on SAPA. So that's what the pressure was to get a transport program going, because we still saw amazing puppies and medium and large-sized dogs that are still at risk of being killed. So growing the program, we just booked more spots on the transport. We were adding, instead of going to one location, we were adding multiple destinations or runs. We were bringing in, we were allocating more staff. So instead of that person going and doing 20 hours of her time, she was doing 40. And then we brought in a part-time person just temporarily to help. And then as well as getting more volunteers to help with transport. That was a big one. We pursued more funding. We were approaching, more foundations for more financial support to be able to pay for these transports and going for grants that we normally wouldn't do. And we found this program to be so valuable because it was targeting that group, and our transports grew to to a level where we were having a handful of small dogs go out, but mostly it was medium and large size. So it was targeting those guys that didn't have a chance and really had no other outlet. And this wasn't all, I mean, yeah, sure, some blacky-headed dogs went, but it was just dogs that there was too many of them in San Antonio. So they were able to go up and get adopted really quickly. And then the biggest thing that was the game changer is partnering with Dog is My Co-Pilot for no charge there, and they added flights for us. So that was really helpful. So a bit about flights. I'll just try to stay within the time. So faster arrival is a big one, right? You're leaving the same day and you're arriving same day. That was like huge for us. We're like, can't believe they're there in just a few hours. Efficiency, just the cost with it. There was no, fortunately we did donate at some point, but there was no charge for the source or the receiving shelter. They connected us to new partners. So that because they were flying all over the country, a lot of our great partners came from, hey, this organization can take 8 dogs, this one can take 10. It was so nice to have that mutual connection and get on the phone. It's easier to say, hey, I know Kara at Dog is My Co-Pilot. She wanted to connect, she connected us. Can we get on the phone and have a conference call? So that was great. And then the media went crazy for flights. They loved it. We had one from Texas Public Radio, one of the hosts on there. He actually went on the crowded plane with the pilot, and I think he regretted it. I think he wanted this like awesome story, and then was like at the end of it, just like he called me and was like, "Oh my gosh, it was really rough," but he got some good footage, and so it was pretty exciting. So again, some flight organizations to look at working with is Dog is My Co-Pilot, Wings of Rescue, another one that has a similar model, Pilot and Pause, volunteer pilots that will rescue or transport dogs in their smaller planes. Things to consider, just staffing, your volunteers, supplies, kennels, sometimes you don't get them back. So we had to do a big donation drive. We were able to organize it where kennels were coming back. We would get empty kennels as we filled the plane, so that was really nice. And then just really, there's a lot more organization. I would say with a flight, there was requirements. We had to make sure that they had like the little tags on them with their destination, so it was easy for the pilot to unload. And then the tough thing about it was seasonal. We couldn't be flying in the winter and rough times, but it's a lot of work. So sometimes it's kind of nice to mix up the ground transports with the flights because of all the work. It's literally, I was up all night, and we've got volunteers literally working for about 48 hours just trying to get the flight together and everything prepped. And then there is a strict takeoff time, which is always conveniently at 6 in the morning. So we would get together at 3:30 in the morning just to get ready for it. So it's a little bit crazy. So medical and transport, I believe the rule with health certificates is 10 days out. We usually did it the day before or the day of transport, usually the day before to get all the health certificates done. I would definitely do this because, if you do a health certificate or your vet does an exam, a lot can happen in 10 days. They might break with URI is the most common thing that happens, kennel cough or ringworm or something. So it was nice to be able to get that exam right before they went on the flight or the ground transport. Consider out of shelter time. So we knew that we've got disease coming out of the city shelter. We knew distemper was a real thing. Parvo was a real thing. Even though partners were begging for puppies up north, they didn't understand the disease that we were up against. So we actually said nobody under 6 months. We weren't going to transport them. We wanted them to have the boosters on board, make sure that they were safe. And we weren't, worst nightmare is a shelter getting distemper and they've never seen it before. So we actually had kind of a strict no puppy rule. They could be, 6 months and over, but we were pretty strict about that. Not to say that everybody, that transporting puppies is bad. We've definitely transported puppies. It's just we were seeing a lot of disease come out of the city. If they just came out of the city and transport was in 2 days, we were going to make them wait to the next transport, try to get them into a foster or boarding until the next month's transport, because we knew the risk of disease was really high. So just trying to protect the partnerships and do the right thing for the dogs. Heartworm's a big one. I don't think I've ever met a partner that takes heartworm positive dogs. It's even hard to get them to take a dog that's been treated for heartworms but is still within that 6 months after treatment that they'll still test positive. So it is tricky. There are a couple partners that will take that, but for the most part, people are kind of scared of heartworms. So having a heartworm treatment program, maybe getting fosters, we just really ramped up our local adoption efforts for heartworm positive dogs to try to give them that outlet. And then it is sort of common where the receiving shelter wants the source shelter to do all this quarantine and keep them in the shelter. But my instinct and what I've talked to vets about is kind of doing the opposite. So yeah, you don't want to right out of the shelter in the south transport them up north necessarily, but keeping them in a shelter where there's a lot of disease and overpopulation, that's not great. You'll hear a lot of talks about intake and flow. Faith is gonna go over that, she's here. And so really the advised thing to do is when the dogs come up to the receiving shelter, good, you've got them out of that kind of disease, sort of high risk area, move them in, and we'll go over that more, but move them as a herd. So instead, you've got one kennel, you've got 10 new dogs that came from Texas or something, move them together, don't let them intermingle with your other population. And so it is sort of like a watch period to keep everybody healthy. So instead of making the south shelters, keep them all together, try to just do that up north. And then health certificate requirements, I included again, this was really hard for me to find and nail down, like, what are all the requirements? Every state has different requirements. Washington, for example, will not take any heartworm. They have to have a heartworm negative test on file to be able to take it in. Some states are really strict, some are not strict at all. So every state has their own requirement, and here's the website you would go to be able to check each state. It's the best place I've found to be able to have a one-stop shop, so you're not having to go to each individual state to figure out what their requirement is. Use your short-term fosters. There's obviously a lot of benefits of this. This was one of those things that we didn't think was going to happen, but has been super, super helpful. We used our fosters. There was an end date. They knew transport was leaving in 2 weeks, so they knew, okay, I can plan a vacation, I can plan a holiday. So great. Use this program. Our short-term fosters, it became its own program, and we didn't even think that was going to happen, but transport helped with that. So they're fostering dogs until they went with transport. They don't have to market or go to events either. And then encourage sending letters with the dogs and giving them those updates, even in transit, like, hey, they're in Utah, they're almost there, we're so excited, or whatever it is. And encourage, they know these dogs are invested, so many tears, people are really sad about it. It's bittersweet moment for everybody. So encourage sending letters. It helps actually the receiving shelter know more about the dog. They're getting those home notes, which is invaluable. And we've seen so many heartwarming stories of adopters connecting from the north with southern fosters. It's just incredible. Great way to keep the morale up for your fosters too, so they want to come back for more. Volunteers are going to be your best friends, so definitely don't be afraid to utilize them. Transport is a lot of logistical work, from busy work, printing kennel cards, doing labels, medical paperwork, just getting all that done. Have them help you with that. You'll find a lot of people want to be a part of this, so these are some of the things that we would allow volunteers to do and encourage them to help us with. Usually you're going to have health certificates, or you've got your one drop-off day. You're going to have all these fosters in line with dogs. It's chaotic. Get your volunteers to be your check-in people and kind of help the line. Even if it's just 10 dogs or 5 dogs, still fosters in front of you that you're like, oh, help me. So get the volunteers to help with that. Of course, the physical part, loading up the transport, it's a lot of work, so getting help with that. If you need more temporary fosters, you need more donations to fund the program. Get volunteers to help spread the word with flyers, their own social media. Volunteers are so incredibly powerful. We couldn't have grown the program without them, so really embracing them, part of your program, is key. So just winding down, I want to show you just a couple great stories. Honey, she's one of our Portland dogs. She wasn't one of the first 10, but she went a couple months later. She came from San Antonio, the city shelter. They got 3 days there. She had a litter of puppies. They all were adopted and kind of left her behind, which is common. It's sad. So she had pretty bad hair loss, as you can kind of see in the picture. Really sweet dog. Her tail was always tucked between her legs, but she'd give you little soft kisses. So sweet. She had Demodex mange. It's not contagious, but of course doesn't look great. So she wasn't really a high candidate of getting out alive. We pulled her in and we sent her to foster, and we got these pictures, and we couldn't even believe it was the same dog. Yeah, she's so sweet. Really, really great. So this is what makes you keep going, right? And always trying to share these stories with the rest of your staff, so they get motivated to keep with these stories. Then Ozzy's my little, I call him my little scab foster. He's sarcoptic mange. He was found at a bus stop in a pretty rough area of town. My husband found him as he was driving home. He was just on a busy road. So we brought him home. He was only 5 pounds. Super, super sweet. We ended up fostering him for a while. Again, he's a puppy, so we wanted to make sure, you know, he had the mange to take care of, intestinal parasites, and then making sure like he was fully vaccinated. But he finally went on transport about 6 months, and his adopter still keeps in touch with me, and I love his photos, and he lives in Oregon as well. She's really outdoorsy. They do lots of fun little vacations together. I'm so jealous of his life. He wears a bow tie all the time and looks so fancy. And like I love seeing the pictures of them together, but it's just crazy to see these transformations. This also got my husband hooked, so I can always like bring home transport fosters. He's totally cool with it, yeah. And then I'll just close. We can hopefully squeeze in a few questions. I just have one really nice video to show you. It's a quick 1-minute clip, and then I'll get some questions at the end. I'm also more than happy to stay after, answer anything you guys need. I've got my business cards, so we can keep in touch because I know it's a lot of information.
We are in Driggs, Idaho, and we are super excited to be here partnering with Dog is My Co-Pilot and San Antonio Pets Alive to help animals that were in the shelter system in Texas make their way to Jackson and find them loving forever homes in the next days and months. It is wonderful to be able to help out with hurricane victims. It's pretty neat to be part of a national rescue effort. This is the second time this year we've been able to do a flight in from Hurricane Harvey. The first one was a few weeks ago when we brought in 10 cats and 5 dogs, and now we have 8 more dogs arriving today, and we are so excited to meet them.
Hi, Mary. Welcome to Wyoming.